everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And we're the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right, we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's
right.
Seth, did you have fun on Brocation?
I had a blast on Brocation, complete with fishing, eating, cookout food, doing some activities that we definitely planned.
Yeah, those were fun activities. I liked the one where we did stuff together.
That's the best activity. Hopefully running my game of Paranoia and you guys having a good time.
That was real fun, or I had a terrible time. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. But anyway, yeah, it was a great time. I'm glad to be back in the office, as it were.
Me too.
And back to making sure that we get episodes out. And because we're back in the office, producer Doug said we're not allowed to go on vacations again, and that we have to do an episode about video games this time.
Well, producer Doug, we are talking about video games today. Don't worry. We're also talking about other things, though, so be a little worried.
Ooh, he's always a little worried. If you're interested in listening to Whataboutisms from Producer Doug, you can follow his Facebook page.
Yeah, that's right.
At Producer Doug on Facebook.
Yeah, a Producer Doug on Facebook. He is the grumpy man with the cigar. So if you see a different Producer Doug that's not a grumpy man with a cigar, don't follow that one. That's the wrong one.
If there's multiple grumpy men with cigars, follow them both.
Follow them all?
Yeah, so go give Producer Doug on Facebook a follow, and you'll hear him complain about life.
That's true. Liberty and the pursuit of happiness.
No, just life.
Oh, okay. Before we get into today's episode, Seth, do you want to tell me what you've been recently playing?
Recently, I've been playing Darkside Detective, which was released back in 2017 and was developed by Spooky Doorway and published by Acupora Games. You play as the Darkside Detective, Detective Francis McQueen, and he is in a town that's called Twin Lakes, and it's kind of, I think, reminiscent to Twin Peaks. And so he has to go and figure out things that cross into the dark side, which is the alternate world that layers onto Twin Lakes, and try to rectify situations. I call it a vignette puzzle adventure game. It's an adventure game that's set in these little mini vignettes. There's 9 cases in total, and you play through the little cases that may have some items that you need to pick up, people you need to talk to, puzzles that you need to solve, and ultimately you need to resolve the case. And then you're done. You move on to the next case, and it's a different thing. Usually you meet up with your partner, Dooley, who's kind of dumb, but there is a really fun gag with Dooley where he follows you pretty much everywhere, up to and including closets and toilets. You don't see him move in an animation. Your character moves across the screen, but he always stands, and then when you enter into a new room, he's also just standing in that room as if he followed you in, but he does it for, like, if you go into a closet, or you go into a toilet, or you go into just like any random room, he just goes in there, and you could talk to him to get advice or help, and usually it's commentary about what's going on in the case. He's also somebody who's a little bit of more of a skeptic than somebody who believes in like the dark side and stuff like that, even though he works in the dark side division. But it's a good comic relief. The game's got kind of a LucasArts type feel to it in the old 90s adventure games. It's got that kind of like Monkey Island humor to it. It's been really good. I played it back a while ago, and then I just never finished it. They released a sequel. I was thinking about playing the sequel. I never got back to playing the game, and then I was like, I'm just gonna go back and beat Darkside Detective. It's not terribly hard, so I also feel smart because I get to beat the game, but I'm halfway through it now, Darkside Detective, and maybe in the future episode I'll be playing Darkside Detective the sequel.
Ooh, maybe.
That's where I'm at today and what I've been recently playing. It's Darkside Detective.
Great. Sounds fun.
What about you, Zach? What have you been recently playing?
Seth, recently I've been playing Wobble Dogs. Released in 2022 and developed by Animal Uprising, Wobble Dogs is a game where you care for wobble dogs. Wobble dogs are their own species of animal, as the game lets you know the moment you start it off. It says, wobble dogs are different species than regular dogs. Do not feed regular dogs the things you feed wobble dogs, because wobble dogs will eat anything, including burritos and nutritional blocks and they're cocoons because they can pupate into different shapes and sizes. They look like dogs. However, they have very square bodies and very wobbly legs, so they frequently fall over and they can't get up on their own. And the game is a sandbox pet simulator. So your job is to take care of the dogs, clean up after them, look after them, make sure they're happy, give them food, and also make sure that they have a good gut biome. So you have to make sure you're giving them unique food so that they don't have just like a singular gut biome. You got to keep them healthy. Wobble dogs are born out of eggs, which reminds me a lot of the game Oddballs, which also has creatures born out of eggs that are weird looking. In fact, the game itself reminds me a ton of Oddballs and Dogs with a Z. Those kind of very simple pet simulators where all you have to do is just kind of mind the animal and take care of it. Wobble Dogs is a cute game. It's very relaxing. It's definitely a nice change of pace from like all the action games like Dune and stuff that I've been playing. So I've definitely been enjoying it. And I recommend people check it out if you too want to take care of a wobble dog.
They kind of look like if Slinky got combined with foam.
Yeah, they do. They're cute things. I like when they fall over and they get sad because they can't get back up properly and you have to pick them up.
Apparently they do have expiration dates though.
Yes, it's true. You can respawn your wobble dog out of the egg machine.
Oh, so you can bring them back to life.
Yeah, you can bring your wobble dog back to life. Well, to get into today's episode, I thought it'd be fun to talk about crossover video games, just because I love crossovers. One of my favorite type of media is, in fact, the crossover. It's this idea of taking two worlds, sometimes completely unrelated, and pushing them together in a way that barely makes sense and often has unexpected results. Personally, one of my favorite crossovers is the Marvel DC crossover in the late 1990s, which led to the brief Amalgam series of comics where you had characters like Logan Wayne, a millionaire playboy who also was part of the clandestine Weapon X program, or you have Charles Xavier, the Sorcerer Supreme who takes on the mantle of Doctor Strange Fate, or the Amazon, who is a mutant born under the name Aurora, who was adopted by Queen Hippolyta and raised by the Amazons and grew up with her jealous sister Diana Prince, who later got married to Trevor Castle, aka the Punisher. The Amalgam run is goofy and dumb. It's like each issue is a standalone issue. It's always billed as issue 1, and it comes with like letters to the editors that are all fake because it's supposed to be this implication that Amalgam has always existed. So when you're reading the issue, it's talking about old issues of Amalgam that aren't even real. But I like this concept of combining things and having weird results out of them. In fact, one of my favorite results was the fact that after the DC Marvel crossover, there was a character created named Axel Asher, aka Axis. Axis exists in both the DC and the Marvel universe. In fact, he is owned jointly by both entities, so he can exist in both universes. However, they've never done anything with him ever again. So he was created for this like special. He had like one reappearance and that was it. But I just love that there's a character who exists in both universes that's the same character because he exists between the universes and he keeps them from merging again. Crossovers are silly. They're pure fan service and they always just make me smile. Now, by definition, a crossover is when two established characters or events from different storylines meet and interact. There are a lot of different subsets of crossover fiction. There's crossovers within one fictional universe. So, for example, the Avengers movie and comic series is technically considered a crossover as you have different comic runs or movie runs that merged into one storyline. So, for example, Iron Man had his own run of comics before showing up in the Avengers, or Iron Man had his own movie before showing up in the Avengers. I think we don't necessarily think of the Avengers as a crossover comic, but by definition it is. And there are also crossovers that exist between two storylines that establish them to be in the same universe of that continuity. So one of the better known examples is the TV show Mad About You, which featured a character named Ursula played by Lisa Kudrow. Kudrow was also on the show Friends and played Phoebe. Now, Ursula would cross over into Friends and be revealed to be Phoebe's twin sister, and Ursula then became a reoccurring character on Friends. So this character from Mad About You essentially became a Friends character because they are the same actor, and that's a kind of crossover. Yeah, it's a kind of crossover I think is really goofy.
I didn't even know that because I never really watched Mad About You. I just knew that Mad About You existed. Also, we can't talk about crossovers without talking about what I'm going to talk about right now.
Are you excited to talk about it?
I'm always excited excited to talk about my favorite police officer. Another example which became incredibly complex the more you think about is the fact that the serious doctor drama St. Elsewhere also had an episode where they go to the bar Cheers from the show of the same name. The characters of Dr. Turner and Dr. Ulrich of St. Elsewhere also appeared on an episode of Homicide: Life on the Street. Now here's the fun part. Homicide: Life on the Street would cross over on the Law & Order series, specifically thanks to the character of Detective John Munch, played by Richard Belzer. And Richard Belzer decided that his character was Detective John Munch on Homicide: Life on the Streets, also Detective John Munch on the Law & Order series. He also was Detective John Munch elsewhere, and it mostly, I don't know if it was Richard Belzer that pushed for it, or if it was like just the people
no idea.
Maybe he just had they're like, we want a Richard Belzer police officer, when Richard Belzer passed away a little while ago now, but so rest in peace. He was a great character actor, and specifically a great single character actor. And that single character was Detective John Munch. So I don't know if at one point in time he or the showrunners decided that, well, I guess you could just be the same character. So this detective would become a regular detective on Law & Order SVU. He also made appearances on other Law & Order series, as well as Homicide: Life on the Street. And let's also remember that the doctors from St. Elsewhere appeared on Homicide: Life on the Street, and those doctors went to Cheers. So in theory, Detective John Munch could go to Cheers. Now, the Detective John Munch character also appeared in X-Files, The Beat, The Wire, 30 Rock, Arrested Development, and the 1996 film A Very Brady Sequel, which was about the Brady Bunch. And so that means that character, John Munch, exists in all those worlds, and all those worlds exist in the same continuity. And it's like this huge cinematic universe that centers around mostly John Munch. In the end of St. Elsewhere, it reveals that the entire show exists within the mind of a child named Tommy Westphal, which means all of these shows, St. Elsewhere, Cheers, Cheers-related media such as Wings, Frasier, and the Tortellis, and I think almost maybe even Night Court a little bit, but so does the entire Law & Order universe, X-Files, The Beat, The Wire, 30 Rock, Arrested Development, and the Very Brady Sequel, implying that the Brady Bunch also all just exist in Tommy's mind. The longer you think about it, the more you see all the shows that they're connected to it, and you can even make an argument that they all exist in the same universe, and you can almost link almost every show from Cheers to Doctor Who and connect them all through some crossover and like just chain crossovers. John Munch is one of the most significant chains, but there are other chains that can chain a bunch of shows. For the example, like Frasier is from Cheers and all that jazz. So like there's all these spin-offs or side characters, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine shows up in a New Girl. And like, so Brooklyn Nine-Nine and the New Girl are connected. I'm sure there's characters in both of those shows who have maybe had a appearance in other shows as well as their characters. So it's just like this perpetual TV universe.
And it's really sometimes the silliest things that connects them. Like Doctor Who only fits into the universe because they did a crossover with EastEnders on a special like one-off thing in the 90s. Like, you know, and EastEnders has crossed over with a ton of stuff like Coronation Street and all these other things. So it just keeps building upon itself. And it's one of the reasons I love crossovers. They're so silly. And if you take them too seriously, they can really create some complex universes. Now, another type of crossover is two completely unconnected universes. These are also some really silly examples. They can include the previously mentioned Amalgam comics, or even some of the examples the more you think about the Tommy Westphal universe. Some of the different unconnected universe crossovers can include, back in the 1970s, there was Superman versus The Amazing Spider-Man. There was also more recently Star Trek/Doctor Who by IDW. There was the famous Archie Meets the Punisher in 1994, where All-American teen Archie Andrews meets the murderous vigilante Frank Castle, aka the Punisher. And then there was also the recently released DC X Sonic the Hedgehog comic run, which was written by guest of the podcast Ian Flynn. So crossovers are they are a huge staple in media, especially comic books, especially TV shows. But that being said, they're also in video games. So let's talk about a few of the most famous video game crossovers. And we're going to go just through a few. The list is endless, and we're going to leave out ones that we've already talked about. So we won't be covering Kingdom Hearts, and I think we've already talked about Smash Brothers, but we're not going to talk about it this time. And if we haven't, maybe we'll do a dedicated follow-up just on Super Smash Brothers, because that can be a little complicated.
So we're going to start off with the Konami YY World. Released in 1988 for the Famicom, Konami YY World is a platformer that acts as a crossover between other Konami properties. You start the game as either Konami Man or Konami Lady. Konami Man was a mascot of sorts for Konami who usually appeared as a cameo or an Easter egg in other Konami titles. Through the game, you rescue different characters and are able to then play them. The characters you save include Gomen from Gambar Gomen, Simon Belmont III as a descendant of Simon Belmont from Castlevania, Getsu Fuma from Getsu Fuma Den, Uppa from Biomiracle Boku Uppa, Penta from Antarctic Adventures, Vic Viper from Gradius, Twin Bee from the Twin Bee game, a Moai who appears in Gradius and in Moai-kun, King Kong who appeared in the Japanese-only King Kong 2 Akari no Megaton Punch, and Mikey Walsh from the Goonies film. And the Goonies Japanese exclusive Famicom game.
I just love that it's just Aunt Mikey.
And Mikey Walsh. The game itself is non-linear, with most of the gameplay being similar to Castlevania, complete with respawning enemies, different stairwells to take you up and down a level, and different collectibles. It's curious that the game was not released outside of Japan, but because it relied on so many characters from the Japanese exclusive games, it makes a little bit of sense, because I think a couple of those characters I wouldn't really know. Even now, I don't really know who they are, and I've been doing a podcast about video games for a number of years now. There would be a sequel called YY World 2, which I just feel is very close to calling something World War
World War II.
World War II. And that was released in 1991 for the Famicom, with many of the characters from the first game returning, with the exception of Mikey from the Goonies, probably because of the license issue, and is replaced with Bill from Contra, because there's no license issue with that.
The guard of the child replaced him with a man with a machine gun.
It's a little swappy rooey. The YY series would continue until 2009 with different spin-offs like a bingo game, poker game, and 2 racers, predominantly released in Japan only. So like if you wanted to play some YY World, you would have to import it.
Now, next up, we have RoboCop vs. Terminator, which might be familiar to some of our listeners. It was a retro rewind of Seth's a while ago. RoboCop vs. Terminator was a 1993 game based on a 1992 comic run by Dark Horse. The comic itself was written by Frank Miller and drawn by Walt Simonson. The plot of the comic involves a soldier named Florence Langer infiltrating Skynet and learning that the reason Skynet became self-aware is because Skynet made contact with Officer Alex Murphy, aka the RoboCop. So Florence goes back in time so that she can stop Skynet from taking over the world, and to do so, she goes back to Detroit to try to kill Alex Murphy. And Skynet realizes that she's doing this, so they send 3 Terminators to protect the RoboCop. RoboCop, however, is a good guy, so he realizes that Skynet has ulterior motives, and he's able to convince Florence to understand that he wants to stop them too, and they team up to find a solution. The Super Nintendo version of the game adapts the storyline pretty directly, while the Genesis version slightly changes the storyline in that the Resistance doesn't send anyone back to kill RoboCop. Rather, Skynet sends Terminators back to cripple the Resistance. Development of the game began after Virgin Games got the license to adapt the comic line, and they got this license at a cost of about $2 million, or $4.5 million today. Virgin was also working on another game at the same time, Disney's Aladdin. According to one of the developers, Tim Williams, they felt that having Aladdin in development at the same time took resources away from RoboCop vs. Terminator. And per an interview with Williams, he stated that he felt RoboCop vs. Terminator was the quote-unquote ugly stepchild. A huge source of inspiration for the game would be Contra 3: The Alien Wars, as Williams and lead designer John Bodie were big fans and would often play the game between working on their game. So they would be playing Contra 3 and be like, yeah, we should just make the game like this. And they decided to take the same bullet mechanic and adapt it for their game. They also wanted gore, a lot of gore, and they got a lot of gore because it's a pretty gory game for a Genesis title. Overall, RoboCop vs. the Terminator did decently well in terms of reviews. Meme Machine Sega gave it 90 out of 100, and Computer and Video Games gave it a 93 out of 100.
The late 1980s and early 1990s were basically every crossover ever, and that was just going on across all sorts of things. Not only did RoboCop vs. the Terminator get published in 1992, there was also Batman Judge Dredd in 1991, Galactus and Darkseid in 1995, and Batman and Punisher in 1994. One of the defining comic runs of the era, though, was of course Alien vs. Predator in 1989. The original comic run from 1989 combined the horror sci-fi Alien franchise with the more action sci-fi centric Predator series. The result was a story involving a group of colonists from the planet Ryushi who raised creatures called Rinth as cattle. However, Ryushi turned out to be a predator hunting ground. The predators planned to release Xenomorph onto the planet to hunt. I think they weren't even acknowledging that the people were there. They're like, we need to hunt things, and we're going to hunt xenomorphs. But a xenomorph queen manages to get eggs past some predator security methods, and they infect the Rinths, the cattle. A predator elder, Broken Tusk, arrives on the planet and begins hunting the colonists, but soon has to deal with the xenomorphs. Broken Tusk teams up with a human named Mashinko, and they fight xenomorphs together. The comic ends with Mashinko being marked by Broken Tusk and then joins the hunt. She becomes a predator and joins Broken Tusk, and they have fun adventures in the sunlight.
Well, I think Broken Tusk dies, but she does become,
spoiler alert. The comic had a few sequels, but it would also lead to books, board games, 2 movies, Alien vs. Predator in 2004 and Alien vs. Predator in 2007. I've seen both of those movies. When I saw Alien vs. Predator in 2004, I thought that the movie was horrendous. I think my quote was when somebody asked me, "Oh, you just saw Alien vs. Predator. What did you think?" And I said to somebody, that movie was vile. And that was a while ago, so you can imagine I was not pleased with that movie. I don't know if I actually saw Alien vs. Predator Requiem, but I can imagine it's probably some of the same. If you like those movies, you're wrong, but you can like your own stuff. There would also be a toy line, a theme park attraction, pinball machines, and of course, a bunch of video games. Video games, on the other hand, are great, at least the FPSs. There are 2 types of Alien vs. Predator games, the beat 'em up and the FPS. The first Alien vs. Predator game was one that was released for the Super Nintendo, developed by Joryudun in 1993. Alien vs. Predator is a beat-em-up where you play as a predator who's hunting xenomorphs. The story is a little bit different from the comics, with it being about a predator arriving on a planet called Zega 4, which has been overrun by xenomorphs. You fight through different levels and different types of xenomorphs, including a form that looks like a dolphin, a winged version, a snake version, and an ape version. And the final boss is the Xenomorph Queen. A port of the game was planned for the Atari Jaguar, but would be canceled. A different version for the Jaguar would be released that we will talk about soon. There were also plans to port the game to the PC, Sega CD, but both ports were also scrapped. The game, Alien vs. Predator, the beat-em-up game, would go on to have mixed reviews, with Nintendo Power giving it a 3.3 out of 5, N-Force giving it a 39 out of 100, and Famitsu ranking it 22 out of 40.
In 1994, Capcom would develop an arcade game using their CPS2 arcade system, the same one used for Super Street Fighter II, also called Alien vs. Predator. The plot is similar to the SNES version in that it features a planet overrun by xenomorphs and predators fighting them. However, in this game, you play as 2 cybernetically modified humans named Dutch Schaefer, who is based on Arnold Schwarzenegger's character from the original 1987 Predator film, and a new character named Lin Kurosawa, both of them being U.S. colonial marines. You fight through swarms of xenomorphs, and eventually you have to fight the queen xenomorph, and you do so either by yourself or with a group of friends, because this is a Capcom beat-em-up game, which means that you have 4 players that you can play with, and you get to just mess up some xenomorphs. The end of the game features the Predator warrior giving his wrist blades to Dutch and Lin as a sign of respect, but implies that he will fight them in the future, because predators might do things out of respect, but they don't do things out of kindness. The game was developed based on an early script of the film adaptation of the comic. The original plan was to tie the game directly into this movie, but the original script would be rejected and the movie would enter development hell until the Alien vs. Predator 2004 film came out, which is entirely different and based off of a completely revised script. The character of Lin Kurosawa would be a brand new character for the game, as they wanted to use Machiko from the comic line, but they couldn't retain the rights for her. A port was planned for the 32X, but it was canceled. The game left a lasting impact, with the character of Lin Kurosawa later reappearing in Street Fighter Alpha 2, Street Fighter 3 Second Impact, and Namco X Capcom. The toy company NECA would also produce toys based on the arcade versions of the Predators and the Xenomorphs. It was also very well received. The publication Playmeter listed it as the 6th most popular arcade unit, and GamePro gave it a maximum 5.0 for all 4 of its categories in ranking of different arcade elements. Now, as mentioned, the plan was to bring the SNES version of the beat-em-up to the Jaguar, but those plans fell through. The Jaguar would get its own Alien vs. Predator game, and that would lead to its own Alien vs. Predator franchise.
The Jaguar game was developed by Jason and Chris Kingsley, 2 Oxford-based developers who ran the company Rebellion Developments. They were able to secure a deal with Atari after they demonstrated a game concept that featured dragons fighting longships. Atari would commission them to develop the game Alien vs. Predator, because nothing says anything like Aliens vs. Predators like dragons versus longships. They would also go on to develop a game called Checkered Flag, which sounds like a racing game. The sole programmer at Rebellion was a man named Mike Beaton, but he would soon be joined by Jane Whitaker, and they would be assisted by Mike Pooler from Atari on additional coding. They initially planned to develop the game for the Atari Lynx, the handheld system, but that plan would shift to the Jaguar, as Atari wanted to make sure they had some strong titles for the console. Producer James Hampton would propose an FPS to 20th Century Fox and Activision, which was approved. Hampton was inspired by other FPS games at the time, such as Doom, and the game had initially a low budget, which led to some delays. The gameplay, while similar to Dune, is distinct. There are 3 playable characters: the Marine, the Predator, and the Xenomorph, and they all play a little bit differently, with the Marine's goal being to escape and activate the base's self-destruct sequence, the Predator's goal to kill the Xenomorph Queen, and the Xenomorph goal to kill the Marines and kill the Predators and protect its queen. Everyone's real goal is to kill the other ones. Alien vs. Predator was a huge success for Atari. It was released in October of 1994, and by April of 1995 sold 52,223 copies. It was regarded as the Jaguar's killer app, and Computer and Video Game Magazine gave it a 90 out of 100, Game Informer gave it a 9 out of 10, and All Game gave it a 4.5 out of 5. Some negative reviews came from Edge and EGM, with some critics comparing it negatively to Doom. However, some reviewers, such as the game fan's Dave Harvelston, considered the game more strategic than Doom and complimented the audio and visuals. And the games fan being a publication, not just a random fan.
Just a random man they found on the street.
Just a man that's a fan of the game.
I
love the game. I think it's more strategic than Doom, and the audio and visuals are great. A PC game, Alien vs. Predator, the golden game of all of these, and the best game known to man, would be released in 1999. This version of the game is different from the original Jaguar game in 3 great ways. And those 3 great ways are 3 separate campaigns. One for humans, one for xenomorphs, and one for predators. The campaigns are independent, with the xenomorph defending its hive, the human trying to escape and kill the xenomorph queen, and the predator hunting marines, but also killing xenomorphs because they get in the way of the predator. Part of the game is set on LV-426, which is a research station featured in the first Alien film from 1979. A sequel, Alien vs. Predator 2, would be released in 2001 from Monolith Productions, and another game called Alien vs. Predator Extinction would be released in 2003 from Zono. There would also be a tie-in game to the Alien vs. Predator Requiem, released in 2007, though this would be a third-person adventure game, and another FPS, Alien vs. Predator, would be released in 2010. Finally, there would be another third-person action game called Alien vs. Predator Evolution, which would be released in 2013, though it was exclusive for iOS, Android, and the Ouya. I would put money on it that it's probably not playable on those anymore. You probably have to figure out a way to play them because it's probably not available on the Play Store or the Google Play Store. One of the fun things about this game I just want to talk about is that it came out, if you noticed, in 1999. The original PC game, and it was very good. It was such a great game. It really set first-person shooters a high bar for me, and it was very much like just so cool kind of seeing the different avenues and having entirely different game mechanics. So like if you were the alien, you could crawl along on walls. And if you were the predator, you had multiple visions and you can go invisible. And if you were a marine, you died. But it was just like, it was a great game. I really enjoyed it. It came out in 1999 and I played it. And then in 2004, they would release a movie. I went into it being really excited about the Alien vs. Predator games because I really liked all the ones that came out before the movie came out. And then I went to the movie being really excited that I would see some faithful adaptation of the video games that I've come to love, and I was greeted with utter vile crap. And I really lost faith in the whole movies, games. I did recently pick up Aliens Dark Descent.
Oh, I've heard good things about that.
It's a squad-based tactical game where you play as Marine squads fighting aliens, and I've been having a good time with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've played Alien Isolation, which is a game that made me poop my pants. Now,
yeah, I want to play Alien Isolation, but I think I'd have to play that with other people, also possibly with the lights on for sure.
Now, before we close out our episode, we should talk about one of the greatest crossover franchises of all time, because we've surprisingly haven't talked about it yet. Marvel versus Capcom. We talked a bit about it before. Both Seth and I have talked about it because we love it. Seth has an arcade cabinet down in his basement that features Marvel versus Capcom on it, one of the original ones for the arcade. And the history of Marvel versus Capcom is really interesting. Marvel and Capcomverse teamed up to work on the Punisher arcade game, which was a beat 'em up that you do what the Punisher does best, beat them up. And the game was really successful, so Capcom said to Marvel, hey, let's do this again, and they did so again by releasing X-Men Children of the Atom. Children of the Atom would see releases not just in arcades, but also on the Sega Saturn, PlayStation, and MS-DOS, and that was a game that I think Seth had me play as a retro rewind before. I think I played the DOS version. It plays similarly to Darkstalkers or Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, being based on the same system as those games, though instead of your usual run of Capcom characters, it features characters from the X-Men comics. Specifically, though, the X-Men comics and the cartoon, because it would feature the 1990s animated series cast reprising their roles as the different X-Men characters, which was a pretty big deal at the time to be playing an arcade game and hearing voices that you were familiar with on the screen, because usually when you heard voices in arcade games, they were either digitized or just not good. So hearing actual professional voice actors in a game is pretty cool, at least at this time. The plot of the game loosely follows the story of the Fatal Attraction storyline, where Magneto plans to wipe out non-mutants by disrupting the electromagnetic pulse of the Earth. So the X-Men have to take down Magneto, who has teamed up with other mutants, because of course he has.
I mean, it's a fighting game. There doesn't really need to be a plot.
That's true. Children of the Atom would actually have its first hint at a crossover with Capcom, as there is a secret appearance of Akuma from Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, now a follow-up game, Marvel Superheroes, released in 1995 in the arcade and was later brought to the PlayStation and Saturn. This game refines a lot of the gameplay from Children of the Atom, but also features just a bunch of different Marvel characters outside of the X-Men. The story also adapts the Infinity Gauntlet comic storyline, which was going on at the same time period, where the main antagonist is Thanos as he tries to collect the Infinity Gems. Different players can also tap into Infinity Gems, allowing them to have different abilities, such as I think Spider-Man gets like a screen clearing attack, but there's also like increased defense and other things that you can do. Also, another secret Capcom character was included, Anita from Darkstalkers, who was an unlockable fighter.
The two companies would properly cross over in 1996 X-Men vs. Street Fighter for the arcade, later releasing on the Saturn and PlayStation. The game features a roster of 17 playable characters from X-Men and Street Fighter. The characters also have special moves, such as attacks that will fill the entire screen when executed. One major issue in the development came from the fact that on the Saturn, the game required 4 MB RAM expansion cartridge. This expansion allowed for the game to have a near perfect conversion from the arcade. However, Sega did not plan to release the 4 MB RAM cartridge in the US. Also, retailers in the US were planning to liquidate their Saturn stock. So the Saturn version would never get released in North America. EB Games would, however, sell imported copies at select locations, because once again, it's a fighting game, there's not a lot of translation required. The European Saturn publisher, Virgin Interactive, was also hesitant to release the game with the 4MB RAM cartridge, and ultimately decided to shelve the port. The PlayStation port almost didn't see release as well, as Capcom had planned the game to be a Saturn exclusive. They were accused of showing favoritism to Sega and would release a PlayStation version that did see release in North America and Europe, and the PlayStation version is notably altered graphically as the memory limitations of the console prevented it from being a one-for-one conversion. While the arcade was strongly praised, the PlayStation version of the game would get mostly negative reviews, Next Generation giving it a 1 out of 5 stars, EGM giving it a 4.6 out of 10, and Computer and Video Games giving it a 5 out of 10. In contrast, the Saturn version received positive reviews, with Next Generation giving it 4 out of 5 stars, and Computer and Video Games giving it a 9 out of 10 stars. However, good luck finding a Saturn version, so either you didn't have a version that was good, or the version you got was crap.
Now, the sequel, Marvel Heroes vs. Street Fighter, would throw in a mix of other Marvel characters into the fold. While some X-Men characters would appear, like Wolverine, Cyclops, and Omega Red, who is not an X-Man, but he is in X-Men, he's a mutant. The rest of the Marvel roster would include Armored Spider-Man as an unlockable character, and also regular Spider-Man as a non-unlockable character. There was Captain America, a US agent who was also unlockable, Hulk, Mephisto, also unlockable, Shumagorath, Blackheart, and the Hulk. Street Fighter's roster included all of the usual characters, Akuma, Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, M. Bison, etc., but also some secret characters like Mecha Zangief, Dark Sakura, and Shadow from Street Fighter Zero. Like X-Men vs. Street Fighter, the Saturn port would utilize 4MB RAM cartridge. Due to this, the Saturn port would not be released outside of Japan, because the Saturn had lackluster sales in overseas markets. The PlayStation version did release outside of Japan, and also had to have some tweaks made to it to get it to run properly again, though this time they did a little better. The PlayStation version was reviewed more positively. GamePro gave it 4 out of 5 stars, IGN gave it 7.5 out of 10, Game Informer gave it an 8 out of 10, and GameSpot would actually import the Saturn version. So GameSpot reviewed both, and in GameSpot's opinion, the Saturn version ranked at a 7.3 out of 10, while the PlayStation version ranked at a 5.7 out of 10. So GameSpot was like, hey, just so you know, you're playing the worst version. There's a better one out there, but you can't play it because it is Japanese exclusive. In 1998, another sequel, Marvel vs. Capcom, Clash of the Superheroes, would release. Now, instead of just fighting Street Fighter characters, it would add in a mix of other Capcom characters, Mega Man, Captain Commando, Strider, and Morrigan from Darkstalkers. The game also uses an assist system, where other characters would appear briefly and aid you in combat. Many of the Marvel assist characters would be X-Men characters. In fact, most of the roster of fighters doesn't include any X-Men characters except for, I think, Wolverine, and that's it. I don't even think Cyclops made it onto the full roster. But some of the assists include Colossus, Cyclops, Iceman, Jubilee, Juggernaut, Magneto, etc. Outside of the X-Men, there are also Thor, Sentinel, and US Agent as assists. For Capcom, the assists would include Shadow from Street Fighter Zero, Anita from Darkstalkers, Arthur from Ghost and Goblins, and a whole mess of other Capcom characters. The game would be ported to the Dreamcast and the PlayStation, and like before, the PlayStation version had to get tweaked to make it run better on the console. Ultimately, the Dreamcast is considered the closer to the arcade experience. Reviewers noted this and praised the Dreamcast version while criticizing the PlayStation version. EGM, for example, would give the Dreamcast version a 7.8 out of 10, while they gave the PS1 version a 6.5 out of 10.
The series would continue to see sequels going forward: Marvel vs. Capcom 2 in 2000, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 in 2011, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 also in 2011, and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite in 2017. One interesting change to Infinite was the use of a story mode, which features the characters of Ultron and Sigma merging into one being called Ultron Sigma, and the worlds of Capcom and Marvel fusing together. The fusion caused things like AIM from Marvel to be joined with Umbrella from Resident Evil. There are also DLC characters that were released for both the Marvel and Capcom side of things, like Gamora, Captain Marvel, Winter Soldier, Ultron, Black Widow, Monster Hunter, Sigma, X, and Jeddah Doma. A compilation of the earlier games, including Marvel Superheroes, was released as Marvel vs. Capcom Origins in 2012. And with that, is going to wrap up our crossover games episode. There are more crossover games out there, but this should at least hold you over until we decide to do a sequel or do one with some of the broader crossover games like Super Smash Brothers. Maybe if we plan better, we could cross over with another podcast. And we could have a crossover where we release the sequel on a separate podcast.
Ooh.
And then you have to find it. But don't worry, fans. We probably won't.
Well, to get into our retro rewind, Seth had me play Dune, released in 1992 by Cryo Interactive. Dune is an adventure strategy game that is based on the novel by Frank Herbert, though it does take its aesthetics, specifically with only, I think, 2 characters, from the 1984 film by David Lynch. You play as Paul Atreides, who has recently arrived on the planet of Arrakis with his family, and you then are basically told to go do things. The game has 2 elements to it, strategy and adventure. The adventure portion of the game is played from a first-person perspective as you travel around to various parts of Arrakis and talk to people. You can recruit some of them to follow you around, and they will occasionally provide some interesting facts. To be honest, I find the animation to be highly disconcerting because their mouths move very realistically, but their faces are animated, so their mouths kind of move like real people, but their faces are cartoony looking, and it is a little disturbing to me. Anyway, the strategy component of the game is done from a top-down planetary map where you can manage troops. You instruct them to either mine spice or act as security or as military. It's an interesting game, and like the book, it's pretty dense. There are timed components to it, so if you don't harvest spice fast enough, it will deplete, and you can also risk having the morale of your troops drop too low. I find this kind of mix of both adventure and strategy to be really interesting, but part of me wishes it just decided to do one or the other, which I'm thankful that Dune 2 did do one or the other, and it was just a straight strategy game without the adventure elements. I think it would have been cool to see like a proper point-and-click adventure game take on the elements of Dune without the strategy elements. I think that could have been something that could have worked really well, and I'm a little sad that this is kind of a mixed bag in terms of replaying it. I think it's still okay, but I don't know if it holds up necessarily, especially compared to Dune 2, which is just a far better game in terms of being a straight strategy RTS.
Yeah, for sure. But we wouldn't have Dune 2 if there wasn't for Dune.
Well, they were being developed at the same time, I think, and one had to get released first. So now next week, Seth, you can play Krusty's Super Fun House for the Sega Genesis.
Great. That sounds like a lot of fun. Zach had me play Bahamut Lagoon for the SNES, which was released in 1996 and only in Japan. However, there are 2 translations available. One that came out in 2002 that was done by Dark Force, which was a 3-person team consisting of Neil, Clyde Modeline, and CPF. However, it's not a perfect reproduction. Even like Clyde came out and said that it wasn't a perfect reproduction because there was limitations of what was going on at that time. A person by the name of Nier, also known by their username of Bew, released an updated 2021 translation that is deemed the better translation, but it was unfortunately the last thing that they did, as they would pass away later that year. The person Nier, who had the username Bew, the main character in Bahamut Lagoon is the character named Bew, and Bew would be Byuu. So that person clearly loved Bahamut Lagoon, and hence the translation. It's the last game that was actually developed by Square for the Super Famicom and is a tactical role-playing game. The main character is Bew, who's a soldier in the kingdom and has to fight the big bad. The game has 2D RPG grid-based combat, and then turn-based combat once the fighting actually begins. And it reminds me a lot of Shining Force, where you have a blend of a tactical map and then you go into the turn-based fights. I think the game is definitely been pretty good. It's got quite the amount of world to explore, and I wasn't really able to get completely into it during my retro rewind time, but it's definitely something that I may circle back and continue playing because it definitely holds up. The graphics are great. Is it the best Square RPG on the SNES? No, but it's a good one. If you are looking to get it, since you would still need to translate it, I would recommend getting the Nier translation for however which way you play it. Next week, Zach, you can play Dynamite Headdy for the Sega Genesis.
Great, sounds good. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for today's episode. If you have any memories of any fun crossovers, be it through TV or video games or for comics, let us know. You can email us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're available on our website, classicgamingbrothers.com. We're also available on social media. Look us up, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod. Check us out on YouTube. We just made it to 100, baby. In fact,
yes.
Have we made it to 101 yet?
That I don't know.
Well, maybe you will be number 101, listener. I hope you are. Anyway, with that, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's
right.